Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Bruce Morton, and this is the Cancer Interviews podcast. Our guest is Greg Oberst of Covington, Washington. Greg found himself in the role of caregiver after his wife, Linda, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Greg, we look forward to your insights, and we hope they can be informative and inspirational to somebody who may be in a similar situation with a loved one who is battling cancer. So now let's get started. And Greg, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Greg, first, if you would provide a snapshot of your life, tell us the story of your life, where you're from and what you did prior to the time you became a caregiver.
Well, grew up in Oregon, on the Oregon coast, and first 18 years of my life. And then I left the coast to go to college in Eugene, Oregon. Spent 4 years doing that. After graduation, I did continue to live and work in Eugene in radio. My major in broadcasting and telecommunication in college, and had started something of a broadcasting career while I was in college, and then just picked that up and worked for 10 years in Eugene, and then ultimately moved to Seattle, Washington on a career move, and I've been up now living in Seattle and working in Seattle in radio, television, marketing, and advertising related work since then. Yeah.
And within all of that, there was a very blessed day in 1989 in which you got married.
That's right. How could I forget that? Yes, I did along the way there meet my wife actually back in Eugene. And then we moved together to Seattle and got married shortly after we moved to Seattle in the, I guess, late 80s. 1989 is when we got married. And then if we're talking about major life accomplishments, we had a daughter, Olivia, 10 years later in 1999, and settled down in Covington, Washington, which is kind of on the outer edge of suburban Washington, if you will, toward the foothills, Cascade foothills.
Now, this was a great life path for all of you, but things did eventually take a turn for the worse. Can you recall when you first got an inkling that Linda might be experiencing some sort of health issue?
Yes, Linda's always been very good about visiting her primary care physicians and gynecologists and other assorted doctors through her life, keeping up with her health. And I knew on one particular day in 2013 that she had a mammogram to attend, a procedure. And like many of her other mammograms over the years, I didn't give it much thought. It would be routine, I'm sure, and it would be negative and show nothing, I'm sure. So I have to admit to some surprise when I got a call from her, rather frantic, in tears. I was at the office where I work in downtown Seattle at the time, and she was really just broken up. And I at first had trouble understanding what it was she was trying to tell me. But the more words she could put forth through the tears and call it mild hysteria, I got the impression that the mammogram didn't go well and that they saw something in the imagery that produced, and that and it wasn't good. So she was at that time just getting in her car when she called me, and I said, just come on downtown to Seattle, and she wasn't actually that far away from downtown where her doctor's office was, and we met downtown, and didn't really say much initially when we finally were able to get together, and she had calmed down a little bit and explained to me a little bit more detail what happened and what they saw in the mammogram. And so that was the first sort of blunt instrument, if you will, of that experience, was getting that call from her right after her mammogram, and then meeting up with her downtown and trying to get her to settle down a little bit so that I could get some information I could react to and understand the situation a little bit better.
Well, Linda obviously had major changes lying ahead. What sort of changes did you anticipate for yourself?
Well, I mean, that's a great question because you have to think about now what's your role going to be going forward. One thing that I quickly discovered was that the last thing that Linda wanted to hear was that everything was going to be okay. You know, as guys and as husbands, we tend to want to fix things right away for our family and our spouses. And in this case, in her, it was sort of a false sense of security, and she didn't want that. She only wanted the truth. She only wanted what was real and factual, and to deal with that. So, you know, honey, it'll be okay was just off the table. We weren't going to go there with that. What we were going to go there with was with what we knew, and then go on a fact-finding mission. So my role was to, as I quickly found out, was to help her in that regard and be her partner in this fact-finding mission. And there was a lot of ground to cover. And it's true with any medical procedure. You know, another set of eyes, caregiver eyes, is always best. It's unfortunate when anybody facing a major procedure, surgical procedure, or other sort of medical procedure has to go it alone, because there's just so much information to absorb and take in. It's nearly impossible for any single person, I don't care how smart you are, to take that in and discern it and to filter it and then react to it in a way that makes sense and is appropriate. So I knew that my role going forward was going to be you know, her partner in fact-finding and gathering and understanding the information, interpreting the information, asking the right questions, figuring out what questions to ask, and then taking that all back and then just meeting with her and just two of us working together to figure out, you know, what are the facts and what are the options going forward, and what's the timeline, and that sort of thing. So just a partner in fact-finding and then the support in that. That was where I knew I could be the biggest help, and I knew that's where she wanted it. It sounds obvious to say, of course we're going to be there, but you know, it becomes critically important to solidify that plan, and then make sure that when you're with the doctor and getting that information and listening to it, that you're really paying attention. One thing we did that I started doing with doctor's blessing was to record every doctor's session. But even with the two of us listening, we missed some things, and it's just real handy to have that tape recording of every conversation to go back and reference along with our notes. That became a real handy tool for me, and it became a habit. I recorded every conversation we had with every doctor through every step of the process.
Well, it sounds as though the game plan that you eventually came up with was formulated pretty much on your own. You didn't hear from another person who had been a caregiver, and it sounded like you heard from a lot of healthcare professionals. Was there any sort of external source of information that helped you put together your game plan for Linda's journey?
Well, the idea of a second set of eyes and ears in a doctor's office isn't new, of course. That's the preferred approach for anybody going in, and I certainly was aware of that. But I can't say I'm certain that there was some level of internet research that I attempted along the way. I don't recall any books or anything necessarily like that. Or frankly, getting any advice from loved ones who were through similar situations. There certainly may have been. I just don't recall. You know, our family was very supportive, hers and mine, through the whole process. And I'd been through enough other medical situations with Linda. As a matter of fact, that the birth of our child wasn't exactly an easy process. This was a little bit reminiscent of this procedure. Everybody ultimately was healthy and fine after the birth of our daughter, but it was a very difficult and rocky road. So, you know, frankly, we had a little bit of experience in this arena, how how to listen to doctors as a partner, as a partnership, how to decipher information. So now that I think about it, maybe we had a little bit of experience that helped us when Linda got this diagnosis for cancer, that we were maybe a little bit more prepared than some other couples who had perhaps, or other people who had less experience with medical emergencies and procedures and that sort of thing.
So once you formulated this game plan and what you were going to do to be a caregiver for Linda, what were some of the highlights of it? Things that you had to do, things that perhaps you'd never done before, even though you'd been through the childbirth experience?
Well, you know, cancer treatment is pretty daunting, and there are so many layers to it. And so I think one big adjustment was when it became obvious that it wasn't going to be one doctor through this whole process. It was going to be an army of doctors, oncologists, surgeons, reconstructive surgery technicians and surgeons, her primary care physician, oncologist. Did I mention that? It was just an endless line of doctors. So that was a bit, we could see that sort of pathway lining up early. And so we kind of take a deep breath and get ready for this. Also knowing that it just wasn't going to be a quick fix. I mean, there's just steps to the whole process, and they all take time. And so the realization that this isn't going to be, this whole thing isn't going to be over in a matter of days or even weeks. In fact, it's probably, we're looking at a year just at the initial outset. And then the long term, of course, if you're successful, you're monitoring those follow-up, visits and mammograms and that sort of thing. And I guess just the idea that it's the realization that it was becoming more of a long-term prospect, that it was something that was going to be with us for a while in one form or another. That was a little bit, that was a bit of an eye-opener, but that's the reality of the situation. And then you deal with it in that context.
Okay, you mentioned the doctors and nurses, and you'd mentioned visits, which we're going to get to in a second, but that team of healthcare professionals, did some of their care for Linda include home visits?
No, I don't think, no, I don't think so in this case. I think most of, if not all of Linda's procedure, we were able to handle either in a hospital setting or a clinical setting. Yeah, I think we were largely, we were able to avoid the home care layer.
Okay, but there were a number of follow-up visits, as you mentioned, and I would imagine spearheading that that transportation workload would be you. What was that like as you tried to mix it with your full-time job?
It's tricky. We also have, at the time, we had a teenager in high school as well, too, and not quite a driver yet at that point in time. So managing her schedule, my schedule, and then Linda's appointments. Now, early on, Linda was able to drive her to many of her own appointments, and then it was just a matter of me meeting her there at the doctor's office. We tried to avoid at all costs her going in alone, and we largely did that. So the task was really me, at least before pre-surgery, and the workup to that was me just sort of coordinating our times and me breaking away from the office to go up and meet her at this doctor or that doctor. Now, when we got into the surgery sort of layer of the treatment, that was different. So that required a little bit of time off for both of us, of course, which worked out fine. We both were lucky to be working for companies that were very accommodating to our situation, and we had the time off, and we had people willing to cover for us to make sure we could get here or there through the whole process. And so that there's where the sort of the wider support network starts to come into play, where your place of employment, and then occasionally family members step up to help with that. And then we had friends. If Olivia needed a ride to this event or that, or to school or back, We had a nice network of family friends close by who were all too willing to grab Olivia and get her where she needed to be if we weren't, if one of the two of us weren't available to do that. So that it's definitely a thing, you know, transportation and working that out, especially with kids involved. And but you know, in our case, the support was there.
Okay, that's the transportation piece. And the next piece I wanted to bring up is something that affects some cancer patients, but not all. So this may have applied for you, but sometimes cancer patients have certain dietary needs, certain special things. Did that apply in Linda's case?
Not initially. I don't really think at all in her case. You know, she was diagnosed with non-invasive breast cancer in situ. And so this in very early stage. So, you know, that it was very isolated at the time and very early and very treatable was all a good thing. And in her case, her treatment pathway, we were able to avoid any kind of chemo or radiation treatments. And those are the type of treatments where you start probably thinking more about diet than she had to. So no, in her case, I think we were lucky that we didn't have to. I mean, aside from eating healthy, of course, and eating the right things and not doing things to the kind of things that would challenge one's body during such a treatment and procedure. But I think we just tried to eat right, but there were no other special dietary considerations otherwise.
Okay, so you're a caregiver, you have a full-time job, but there's also the matter of keeping the house clean. There's the matter of paying bills. And there's also the matter of perhaps dealing with the insurance company to make sure that Linda is getting the best coverage she can do. Greg, that's a lot of balls in the air. How are you able to stay on top of all this?
Well, I think the support that I had was very helpful. I mentioned it earlier, but it can't be understated. You know, I'm supporting Linda as best I can and throughout the whole process. But there were also people there to support me and Linda as well in other ways. She needed support at her place of office to make sure she could get away and take care of what she needed to. And they were very good about that. I needed the same kind of support at my office, which was absolutely there every step of the way. And then I had, you know, friends and neighbors who just sort of pop out of the, you know, and neighbors especially would pop out of the woodwork and just show up at our doorstep with big giant plates of food. And so we wouldn't have to cook. We actually spent very little time. I spent very little time cooking through this entire, you know, at least around the time of the surgery and the recovery time, was very little cooking being done here because we had neighbors who would just bring us food, cooked food, wonderful plates. And that was just beautiful, a beautiful thing. But at the same time, there's a limit to that support. You know, people want to be supportive, but at the same time, a certain amount of distance is also important too. We wanted to keep crowds down here at the house itself, so that support was sort of limited to the front door, if you will. It was great if you wanted to bring by a plate of food for us at any point, but don't expect to, you know, come in and step right into a party at our household. It just wasn't going to happen. We weren't in a position to host people, but people understand that. You know, people want to come and help, but and which is great, but you know, I think that for us anyway, it felt like that help for the most part needed to stop at the front door, and it worked out fine. But I have to tell you, we were so appreciative of the food, and especially because you know, not having to cook really helps, really helps buy you some time.
Okay, and over this was a lengthy process. Can you cite certain examples of your addressing the process, having a certain evolution? In other words, you learned a few certain things along the way, and as a result, this process was fine-tuned over time?
You mean the support process?
Yes, your caregiving process, just every possible piece in this whole equation. Were you doing it differently near the end than you were at the outset?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was doing it a lot better because there's so many layers and so many doctors and so many therapists and just clinicians. And, you know, at first it feels a bit, you know, perhaps uneven and awkward, but as you get into it, it becomes almost like a job. You start to get the drill. You start to understand the routine a little bit better, and you're able to anticipate perhaps what's next, just now based on your experience. And so I would say by the end of the process, I was definitely a better caregiver than at the start, just simply from experience and being there and sort of funneling away all that, or filing away all that that knowledge. It starts to work for you. Even the sort of medical terminology and language you start to get and understand a little bit through repetition. Yeah, I know what that word now means. You know, and some doctors are better than others when it comes to, you know, speaking in layman's terms. Others will just throw medical jargon at you. But toward the end of the process, that medical jargon became less foreign to me. And then along the way, of course, there's a lot of research that Linda and I were both doing on a personal basis, you know, getting online and, you know, looking up this or that to see what other experiences people might have had that are in similar situations and what pathways they took. And, you know, the more information, the better. And so just that whole process of fact finding, we got much better and more efficient at as it went along. And I think I mentioned this idea of recording every conversation. You know, I quickly, as we got into it, figured out a way to transcribe all those recordings so that we didn't have to go back and listen to the actual tape recording. We had just a printout of everything now, and we could go straight to the transcript to see what bit of information we might have sort of been a little bit fuzzy about or forgotten or wanted to look at again or review. You know, things like that, just sort of, again, it becomes very business-like, and you have to sort of treat it with that sort of efficiency and after time, it just becomes, it feels more like a job. I mean, it isn't, but you have to be efficient and think about it in those ways. You're efficient on the job to be as productive as you possibly can. Well, you need to be efficient and productive in this sort of environment as well.
Now, Greg, a person who is part of this whole story here, your journey and Linda's is your teenage daughter. How did she figure into this, and did you, to some degree, find yourself needing to be a caregiver for her?
Well, yeah, our daughter was certainly a consideration, obviously, and something we had to think about initially in terms of, first of all, how to break the news to her. She was at the time just going into high school, just going in as a freshman in high school, and you know, that's a dicey enough time under normal situations, under normal terms for a teenager going into high school. Lots of apprehension and nervousness, and you know, to say nothing of the time in her sort of biological life. You know, she was changing, and just an awful time for something like this to happen in her family. We didn't tell her initially right away about the diagnosis, mostly because we were trying to get all the information initially You know, in this situation and in many cancer diagnosis situations, it's not a, it's sort of a slow understanding of the situation. You get an initial diagnosis of in Linda's case, a mammogram, and it looks like it's cancer. The technician even said that's probably cancer, but then you've got to do a biopsy, right? And so the biopsy takes 10 days to 2 weeks to get the results back from that. And then you get the call. And so that really was the worst time through this whole process, was waiting for the results of that biopsy after the mammogram to confirm the extent that it was cancer and the extent of it. And so we didn't say anything to Olivia during that time. We decided that, well, let's just wait until we have all the information we know. And we had a vacation planned as well over to the Oregon coast. So we went ahead with that, that trip. And for Linda and I, it was a little bit of a bittersweet vacation, because we knew, of course, that there was a biopsy being diagnosed, and we knew that when we got back from our trip, that within a day or two of our return, we were going to be getting the results of that. So when we did finally get the results of that, and had at least one, maybe two visits with an oncologist to figure out a path forward, it was then, and so that was probably altogether maybe 3 weeks from the initial mammogram to get to that point. It might have been a little bit longer than that. That we finally sat down and gave Olivia the news. It was the last thing she was expecting to hear, of course. And I, of course, will never forget the moment. She was really just quite speechless and didn't know how to respond. All she could think to do was to get up and go hug her mother. And really, that's all she needed to do at that point in time. I was very proud of her. She was very quiet for a while. And then I think she started to sort of get her arms around that whole situation, and it took a few days for that. Then she started to ask more questions. And I was willing to let her be as involved as she was comfortable and she wanted to be in the process. Short of going to the doctor and listening to you know, whatever the topic of the conversation of that particular visit would be. I wasn't going to drag her into any of the procedures or the doctor's office to hear about you know, treatment going forward, that sort of thing. But she did become attentive from the standpoint of wanting to know how this visit went. What did the doctor say today? And so we were able to, you know, filter that information as we understood it and give her a more layman's sort of view of this appointment or that appointment or this treatment going forward. And we were very upfront with her always. After we gave her the news, we weren't going to, you know, hold anything else back from her. It was going to be very truthful all along the way. And then she started to respond very well to that. We told her and warned her that there were going to be times where we weren't going to be available to pick you up, that we might have to sort of on the fly arrange other transportation for you. And she's very down with that. In fact, she became very active in solving those sort of logistics issues that would come up once in a while. She had her network of friends. She knew who she could call to get a ride if she needed one, especially on short notice. So she actually became very helpful in that respect. I also told her that I wanted and expected more from her around the house from a cleaning and cooking standpoint. I can't say that she was all that successful in that regard without a little bit more encouragement. She was, after all, still a teenager, a young one at that. But it wasn't a huge issue, especially when all the food started showing up and we really didn't have to cook all that much. But,
so it sounds like she was grateful for all that food as well as you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, well, Greg, we're happy to report that you got through this and Linda got the upper hand on this. And what was the reaction of you and Linda you know, when you got that outstanding news?
Well, I think we knew that Linda's procedure the pathway forward that we selected ultimately was her decision. But again, she had the non-invasive early cancer in one breast, and so her pathway forward in treatment was a mastectomy, and we knew that the likelihood of recovery was very high. The prognosis was very good all along, and so, you know, this goes back to my point about her not wanting to hear everything is going to be okay. Well, you know, the doctors were able to largely check that box off. My knee-jerk reaction would be to sort of go there before I even had the facts. But as the facts started to come out, we started to understand her procedure going forward and the treatment we selected for her in the surgery. We could see that it was going to be a very, the prognosis was very good. So, I mean, that was great to hear initially, but it wasn't a guarantee either. They don't offer guarantees in this sort of work. But it was good to hear that her prognosis was good, and the pathway forward we decided on was totally agreed upon with the doctors and her staff. And so we felt very confident through this whole process. And then when the actual surgery took place, it was highly successful. Follow-up work didn't show any residual cancer hanging around. So that was just another step in the process, another evaluation, more good news. It was sort of a gradual coming out of this whole situation. And as time went on, we started to gain more and more confidence that we had you know, solved it, at least for the moment. But then again, there's the annual visits back and the checkups, and you're not really completely confident until you hit that magic 5-year mark, which she did hit eventually. And that really, I think for me, that's probably the biggest sort of moment of celebration was getting to that milestone. It was only then where I really felt like, yeah, we licked this thing, and we survived it. She survived it, and she's been healthy since.
Is there anything you guys do to celebrate? Any yearly thing, or just, you know, go over the coast,
No.
go out to dinner, anything like that?
No, we have certainly other milestone events that we celebrate, but I can't say that we celebrate that one. We were happy to have it behind us. Okay,
now the caregiver experience is pretty much behind you. How would you rate yourself as a caregiver now that you can look back at it?
I don't think I was perfect. I had a lot to learn, and I did learn a lot. I think I was pretty good at the end of it. You know, in retrospect, you look back and there are things that you wish you might have done differently, or but not in a major way. Nothing that sort of, no regrets that led to any unfortunate sort of outcomes or pathways. But I guess I would give myself a B+, maybe an A.
Not bad. Not bad. Well, Greg, we're going to wrap it up now, but before we wrap up, I would just like for you to think of somebody who's watching and listening right now, who's on the verge of being in the position you are in. If there's any overarching bit of information or advice you'd like to pass along to such a person, what would it be?
I would say it's the being there in the doctor's office with your partner or spouse or whoever you're offering the care to. You know, different people go into different offices, doctor's offices, in different states of mind. But as a caregiver, you can go in perhaps with a little bit more settled state of mind, a little more a clearer head, perhaps. So I would say that's I think the single most important thing is to be there and listening with another set of ears in the doctor's office when you're hearing about a procedure options or diagnosis or recovery options, any bit of medical information, that second set of ears is just so important. And take as many notes as you possibly can. And if you've got a device of your cell phone or whatever, record the conversation and make it clear to the doctor that you're recording the conversation. I don't know of any doctor that would waive that off. Ours didn't. They supported it. They wanted to make sure that we had the information correctly. But that little tool was really very helpful. And it gave me confidence also that, you know, as you're taking in so much information, gosh, what if I missed something? I don't want to miss anything. I want to make sure I get all the information. So recording those conversations, I think, is just is a tool that's not only practical, but it gives you a peace of mind in the moment that you're not going to miss something important.
Greg, that is a great story and one that was well articulated. So Greg, thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks, Bruce. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Certainly. And if you're listening now, please know that you are not alone. We are all in this together, and that together, everyone achieves more. So until next time, take care, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.